name is Donald, and so my story, I always start with I'm not from this area. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I grew up in a house where we lived doubled up, and that means that it was a house for one family, but there was more than one family that lived there, and so there was 3 families that lived in our house, and my family, we had one floor in the house, and on the floor we had 3 rooms. There was a room for me and my siblings, and then there were 6 of us, and then there was a room for my mother and father, and it was their bedroom, but it was also our living room, and then there was a kitchen, and that was our household, and so it was really crowded in our house, but it was a happy household because we did all the things that normal people did. We played board games together, and we read together, and education was really important in our household. So we studied together too, and everything was really good in our household. My father, he was a good father in the beginning, but then he worked a minimum wage job, and even back then you needed more than one minimum wage job to feed a family of 8. So one day he was coming home from his job, and he was in an accident, and the accident was so bad that his car was wrapped around a tree in a U shape, and so he left the accident. He left the accident with 2 scars. One scar was down the middle of his face. His face had actually been split, and then there was another scar, and that scar was on his heart. And it wasn't a visible scar, but it was a worse scar because from that day on, our household, it became a war zone. And so when my father came home at night, the first person he saw, that's who it would be. Sometimes it was me. Sometimes it was one of my siblings. But most of the time it was my mother. And so the beatings, they went on daily. So they went on every day for a long time. And then one day, my grandfather, he was one of the families that lived in the house. He lived under us. And so he could hear the beatings every day. And so one day my grandfather, he got tired of the daily beatings. And so he confronted my father in the front yard, and they got into a big argument. And the argument got louder and louder. And then my grandfather, he pulled out a gun and he shot my father. And so our household, it wasn't very happy then, but we were still very close. But education was really important in our household, so we were all good students. I was actually a straight A student, and I was a good enough student that I was able to go to a school in my community that was one of the top 10 public schools in the entire country. And in the beginning, I excelled academically. I was a straight A student. Socially, I was on the student council, and athletically, I was on the football team, and things were going pretty well for a while. But after I had been there for a couple of years, I found out that I suffered from an incurable disease. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of understanding about my disease at the time, and so I was asked to leave. So I left that school, and I went to another school in the community. It was a college prep school too, and again, I excelled academically. I was a straight A student. I excelled socially. I was able to be on the drama club and the student council, and I excelled athletically. I was on the football team and the basketball team, and so things were going pretty good for a while. But my disease is progressive, and so once again they found out about my disease, and they asked me to leave. And so I left that school, And I went to another school. It wasn't a special school. It was just my neighborhood school. And at that school, there was actually a little bit more understanding about my disease. So at that school, I was really able to excel. Academically, I graduated in the top 10% of my class. Socially, I was a prom king. I was a homecoming king. I was Mr. Senior. Athletically, I was captain of the football team, and I played on the basketball team. And when I left my school, when I graduated from high school, my classmates voted me most likely to succeed. And I did really well on the SAT, so I was able to pick which school I wanted to go to. I decided to go to the University of Cincinnati, where I wanted to be a lawyer and a football player. But things didn't go so well. When I got there, my disease really kind of took off, and they didn't really understand my disease there either, even though it was a school of higher education. So first I was asked to leave the football team, and then I was asked to leave the University of Cincinnati. And so then I didn't know what to do. I was kind of lost. I just went back to my mom's home. And but one day I was watching a commercial late at night, and the commercial said that I could see the world and be all I could be. So I joined the United States Navy to serve my country. And I went to the Navy, and my ship, it went on a world tour. It went to places like the Africa. It went to the Middle East. It went to the Far East. Went to places like Kenya and Australia and the Philippines and Thailand. But I didn't get to see any of those places because shortly after I got to the ship, they found out about my disease also. And first I became a liberty risk, which meant that I could only leave the ship during daytime hours, and I always had duty during daytime hours, so I never got to go to any of those wonderful places. And then when we got back to the United States, once again, I was asked to leave. And so I went back home to Cincinnati, where things went okay for a while. I started living what most people consider the American dream. I bought a house in the suburbs. I got married. I went through a series of pretty decent jobs. I was a restaurant manager. I was a car salesman. I was an environmental activist. But one by one, I lost those things. I lost my house. I lost the jobs. And I lost my wife. And I became homeless. I didn't become homeless in the traditional sense. I didn't live in a shelter or on a park bench or under a bridge or in an abandoned building. I lived doubled up on a friend's couch or in someone's basement or in someone's spare room or even at my church. But one by one, I lost all of those places as well because of my disease. People would give me the opportunity to stay, and then they'd find out about my disease, and they'd ask me to leave. And finally, I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I did experience homelessness in a traditional sense. I lived outside under bridges. I lived in abandoned buildings. I lived in abandoned cars. I lived on fire escapes. I lived wherever I could find a place to lay my head. And the things I remember most about when I first got out there was that I was always hungry because I didn't know anything about soup kitchens or shelters. And so I did whatever I had to do to survive. And sometimes that meant I panhandled. Sometimes I shoplifted. Sometimes I even had a dumpster dive. I did whatever I could do to survive. And I was always lonely because I would pass hundreds of people on the street every day. But no one ever took the time to ask me my name or look me in the eye. So I was very lonely. So, can you still hear me? So I was very lonely, and that went on for a long time. And then one day I remember it was a cold, wet day, and that's the worst day for homeless people. And so
I went to the bus station because I had seen the bus station on TV. I seen homeless people at the bus station, and I went to the bus station and I ran into some other homeless people, and they start talking to me, and that was the first thing I realized is that they were looking me in the eye and talking to me.